Now you can hear Military Matters Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard and Sundays at noon on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on the iHeart Radio, TuneIn and Audacy apps. This episode is brought to you by Homes for Our Troops, a nonprofit helping build and donate homes to injured post 9/11 veterans. Visit hfotusa.org for more information. I'm Rod Rodriguez.
I'm Jack Murphy.
This is Military Matters. Unless you've been living under a rock this last year, you've heard about a little thing called ChatGPT. Now, whether you've used it or even really understand what it is, now that's a different story. But let me tell you, aside from congressional hearings on aliens, which, by the way, is Jack Murphy's favorite topic, hit him up on Twitter about it, ChatGPT introduced the world to a level of artificial intelligence, or AI, that many didn't even know existed. Today, Jack Murphy talks with an expert in AI. That expert is Paul Scharre. Paul Scharre is an accomplished author and strategic expert serving as the Executive Vice President and Director of Studies at the Center for a New American Security. He is known for his award-winning books on autonomous weapons and the impact of artificial intelligence. With a background in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, Scharre played a leading role in shaping U.S. defense policies. He has also served as a Special Operations Reconnaissance Team Leader in the Army's 3rd Ranger Battalion. Scharre holds a PhD in War Studies from King's College London and has published articles in renowned publications. He's appeared as an expert commentator on news networks and has testified before Congress on national security matters. So, before Skynet goes live and decides humans are a problem, let's get to it. Jack Murphy and Paul Scharre.
I'm really excited to have you here today, Paul. I interviewed you once about your previous book, also on AI, Army of None, which was really interesting. And I'm looking forward to hear what this new book is about. I mean, as we talked about a little bit before the show, I mean, this is kind of like a very topical subject that is in the public. It's in the public eye now, maybe more than it's ever been in the past.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me on and for taking the time to chat with me about it. It certainly is a great time to be talking about these issues where I think, people are hearing about AI. We've gotten to this point where a lot of the AI technologies that were science fiction just a few years ago are real now. A lot of listeners have probably used tools like ChatGPT, and you can see for yourself how sophisticated some of this technology is. What the book grapples with is really, what does this mean for global power? Mm-hmm. How do we think about how AI is changing global power, particularly between the U.S. and China? China is a major global powerhouse in AI. They have said their intent is to be the global leader in AI by 2030. And I take them pretty seriously at that goal. They have serious AI researchers and companies and top labs, and the government's investing a lot in it. And so the book walks through how is AI changing global power, and then what does the United States need to do to stay ahead?
So, I mean, this is super interesting. Let's start off first of all, with sort of a definition of how we're going to define for this conversation artificial intelligence, like between like machine learning, AI, and then, the most of us know AI more through the lens of science fiction. And we think of like Bishop in Aliens or, Blade Runner, these almost sort of like artificial life forms. I mean, when, in your book, in For Battlegrounds, I mean, how are we defining artificial intelligence?
So I use the term in the way it's often used in the field, which is a broad term that's an umbrella to encompass a whole variety of different techniques that AI scientists use to build machines that can do tasks that we might consider intelligent. I realize it's a bit of a circular definition, and some of the problem here is that we don't really understand what intelligence is. A lot of the field of AI has been picking hard problems like chess, where, we pretty confident that people that are better at chess that requires intelligence in some way. So AI scientists say, all right, let's figure out if we can make a machine that's better than humans at chess and see where that gets us. Turns out actually chess, not that hard to build machines that can beat humans. You can do that with just brute force calculation. Now, language turns out to be one of the things that seems to really unlock a whole set of new capabilities. That's what powers these new large language models, is these neural networks, these sort of giant connections of hundreds of millions of different connections of these networks, hundreds of billions of connections, they are trained to predict the next word in a sequence of words. And that's really simple, but it turns out that if you throw enough data and computing power at this problem, you are able to train these systems that not just can predict words, but actually can interact in a way that it's a little bit unclear what's going on under the hood, but there is definitely some measure of what you might call intelligence there. It's not like humans, and that's a place where maybe science fiction points us in the wrong direction because it's weird and it's not the same as people, but they can do some pretty sophisticated things.
And then in regards to the military applications of it, like realistically, I mean, what do you see as the military application of artificial intelligence? Let's say in the foreseeable future, the next 10, 20, 30 years, are we going to see fighter jets piloted by AIs? I mean, are we going to use them for targeting or intelligence? Like if you can predict the next word in a sentence, can we predict where our target is going to be, 24 hours from now? I mean, what, in your view, based on your research, where do you see that leading us from a military perspective?
I think all of the above. The applications for the military are very wide-ranging because artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology, much like electricity or computer networks or the internal combustion engine. So there's a whole wide variety of applications. And in particular, for the military, if we can have a data set that captures a problem and we have clear metrics of performance, then we could probably train a machine learning model to do that task. Sometimes better than people. Maybe it's not as good as people, but it's cheaper, or we could do it at scale, or we could do it faster. And that's all valuable. So some of the things that you're talking about have already been done. AI is already being used for image processing, for satellite images and drone feeds. That's 5 years old. That's what Project Maven did. It's been around for a while now. It's certainly being used in the war in Ukraine to help process imagery that is then feeding into the intelligence that we're giving Ukraine. And on the fighter pilot side, that's also something that's been demonstrated. So I talk in the book, I really actually open the book with this scene in DARPA's Alpha Dogfight competition, where, taking a page from things like AlphaGo, they trained an AI system to go head-to-head against a human pilot in a simulator. Now, there's a lot of caveats, and this is a military savvy audience. I'm sure there's folks who understand that the simulator is not the same as the real world. But in the simulator, demolished the human, totally crushed him, 15-0. The human didn't get a single shot on the AI fighter pilot. And even though there's a lot of limitations there, they're already working on transitioning this to real-world aircraft. So in December of last year, DARPA started flight demonstrations on an F-16 using these algorithms that are actually piloting the plane.
So you're saying that there's already integrating algorithms that are flying American fighter planes?
Yeah, so not in combat yet, test aircraft.
Okay.
But they've demonstrated it on test aircraft, where it's not, obviously autopilots exist now, right? And are widely used in commercial aviation and even in the military. Not only are autopilots, there are some autonomous features like automatic ground collision avoidance that can kick in if the aircraft's about to crash into the ground, if the pilot, is G-lock and blacks out, for example. And that saved pilots' lives already. But this is different. This is a machine learning system that's been trained, not programmed based on a set of rules, but trained based on simulations on what the best maneuvers are to make in dogfighting. And so in the Alpha Dogfight competition, the winning algorithm had 30 years of flight time in a simulator. And it had been trained in a competitive league of over 100 other algorithms that it was competing against. And it was learning different tactics for dogfighting. And what's super wild was not only was it better than humans, but it fought differently than humans. So it learned totally on its own these head-to-head gunshots when the aircraft are circling each other and there's this kind of split second where they're coming at each other head-to-head and you can get a shot off. It's basically impossible for humans because, it requires superhuman levels of precision to do this. And in fact, it's banned in training because it's risky for humans to even try to do this because you might risk a mid-air collision as the aircraft are racing at each other head-to-head. where the algorithm could do that. It can make the shot. It could do it while avoiding a collision, and it learned to do it all on its own by flying in these simulations. It discovered this tactic.
That's, wild. So are we, of course, moving towards the obsolescence of human beings? Where's that line going to be, do you think? Between what jobs the human being can do versus what the AI can do, and what their each limitation is of each.
Well, that line's going to be moving, and it's moving fast. And I think that's a challenge for the military. It's a challenge in other industries. Certainly there's a lot of industries where now people are looking at models like ChatGPT, and people are saying, well, is my job at risk? It's a fair question. I think just as in the case in a lot of industries, it's true in the military as well, that the people that are going to be most successful are those that find ways to harness these tools and then use them to make people more effective. Something that someone said to me once that really resonated with me about robotics in the military, I think it's also true with AI, is to have these systems perform tasks while the people are in charge of getting the mission done. And I think that's right. Like, people are ultimately responsible for getting that mission done, but we've got to be flexible at how we get the mission done. Maybe that makes the most sense by having someone do it manually. Maybe not. Maybe it makes sense to have a person in an aircraft. Maybe not. Maybe they should be remote. And by taking the person out of the aircraft, there's more things we can do with maneuverability or stealth or speed or taking risk with the aircraft. I think one of the things that's going to be challenging is we've got to be flexible about what that line's going to be between humans and machines. It's going to move. And the militaries that are going to be most successful are those that find ways to harness the technology and adapt very quickly.
Right. That you use it as like an assistant.
Yeah. So, it's funny. There's this, after the field of, after Garry Kasparov lost in chess to IBM's Deep Blue in the 90s, he invented this field of centaur chess, where humans will work with machines to basically come up with the best moves. And there was a period of time where that was the best way to play chess. And it was better than human grandmasters alone, but it was also better than machines alone, because the humans could use like multiple different AI programs to come up with the best way to play. Those days are gone. And now we're at the place where the chess AIs are so good, the humans should just get out of the way. And Kasparov himself has shifted to talking about what he calls now a shepherd model, where instead of this like idea of the centaur where humans and machines are working together, it's more like the humans kind of like shepherding this process and picks the algorithm and then lets it just go forth and do. And so I think that model is going to shift over time from assistant to maybe more of like a blend of human and machine cognition, to maybe eventually over time kind of, there are some domains where we pick the algorithm or pick the AI system and then kind of get out of the way.
Yeah. Are there going to be, I have to imagine there are going to be social repercussion or cultural holdups. Particularly, I'm going to keep using the fighter pilot analogy since it's something we can all kind of understand. Are there going to be issues with the Air Force and with pilots specifically? Not being comfortable letting this AI become the protagonist.
Oh, 100%. There already are. Yeah. Pilots get a bad rap on this because they're like the first that AI and robotics are coming for their jobs, but it's coming for everybody.
Right.
And they're not the only ones here, right? So to pick out our service, the Army. In the Army, the resistance has come from the Army medical community in using robotics for medical evacuation, because the Army medical community's mission is medevac. It's to go in there and medevac people. And so the Army medical community has been really active in resisting the use of robotics to do this, because it takes away a core mission for them.
Like a drone that can lift a stretcher or something?
Exactly. Right. Particularly as we see cargo resupply drones that are going to be used in combat, totally makes sense. Drops off ammunition, put the wounded soldier, send it back. Right. What's really interesting is the Marine Corps doesn't have this problem because they don't have a dedicated medical community. They use Navy corpsmen. Right. So the Marines are like all about it. They're like, yeah, why would we not use a drone to evacuate a wounded Marine if, it's going to save their lives? We should do it. Whereas the Army medical community they've actually put down in 3 different memoranda, like official policy is they're opposed to this, which is mind-blowing, right? Because, this could potentially save soldiers' lives.
Well, yeah, I mean, and, we all know the deal of CASVAC helicopters getting shot up at the LZ and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, right. So, so it's exactly, it's a dangerous situation. It's a place where a robot would, of course, be useful. So I think we see this across the board where when you start to touch on these things that are core to a sort of tribe within the military, core to their identity, that's when you get this resistance, right? And when it's something that nobody wants to do, people are fine. So if you look at the Navy aviation community, right, that there's been fights now for the last 15 years about putting a drone on a carrier, and there was a big push by members of Congress and Pentagon leadership to build a stealthy, penetrating combat drone back in 2006. That was official DoD policy. It hasn't happened. There's still no program to do it because the Naval Aviation Committee doesn't want it. What they are building is a tanker drone. Why? Because nobody signs up to be the tanker pilot. You don't see that guy in Top Gun, flying the tanker around giving gas when Maverick's off doing the mission. So, that's the kind of thing that people are more comfortable offloading. And there's value there. There's definitely value. But there's also the challenge that, if we're short-sighted and we don't capitalize on the advantage of these technologies, other people are going to do that. And at the end of the day, that's then you as service members that could pay the price.
Homes for Our Troops, HFOT, is a publicly funded nonprofit organization that builds and donates specially adapted custom homes nationwide for severely injured post 9/11 veterans to enable them to rebuild their lives. These homes restore some of the freedom and independence our veterans sacrificed while defending our country. Nearly 90 cents out of every dollar spent has gone directly to supporting our veterans and enabling them to rebuild their lives. Visit hfotusa.org. That's hfotusa.org to learn more. Wreaths Across America Radio is a voice for America's veterans, an awesome mix of contemporary country, patriotic, and public service programming. And now Military Matters is proud to include itself into that mix. So now you can listen to this podcast, Military Matters, Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard and Sundays at noon on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on the iHeart Radio, TuneIn, and Audacy apps.
Well, yeah, on that note, I think in your book, you also spend some time looking at China's development of artificial intelligence. And I would really be, keen to hear some of your insights based on that, kind of cutting through everything we hear in the press, some of it good and bad. But what were your findings?
Well, look, China's a global leader in artificial intelligence. They have top companies. They have top labs and researchers. So for the military, for both the Chinese and the U.S. military, the problem they have is spinning this technology into their defense organizations because it's fundamentally a commercial technology. It's not coming from secret defense labs. It's like the opposite of stealth technology. And if you think about stealth, it was invented in U.S. defense labs. It's been pretty successful in controlling proliferation. This is totally not the case. It's already widely proliferated. The PLA is going to have access to the same basic AI technology that the U.S. military has. What's going to matter more in terms of a military edge is who's going to be more effective at bringing that technology into the military and then figure out what do you do with it. So to give a historical example here, if you look at aircraft, airplanes were invented in the United States. By the time you get to World War II, that gives the U.S. no meaningful advantage in military aircraft. Aircraft technologies proliferated to all the major powers at the time. And the question is, what do you do with an airplane? How do you use it effectively? And we saw that some countries really succeeded and some stumbled in this. If you look at carrier aviation, the U.S. and Japanese Navy figured out carrier aviation, very successful. The Brits were actually the first to come up with this idea, and they lost it. They fell behind, not because they didn't have access to the technology. It was because of bureaucratic and cultural squabbles within the British military about who would control carrier aviation that held them back.
And how do you see the Chinese integrating AI? I mean, have you noticed any sort of like cultural or institutional difference in how they plan to implement that into their military?
Yeah. I mean, there are more similarities than differences, I would say. And partly because they're watching everything that the US does and then mirroring it. Mm-hmm. So we'll often see, the U.S. does a big swarm demonstration out at China Lake. And then a couple of months later, China does another swarm demonstration with a couple extra drones, which is like the wrong way to think about swarming, but, whatever, right? After the U.S. did their Alpha dogfight competition, China did their own similar AI fighter pilot competition. And when you look at the literature within the PLA on the work that they're doing, there is a lot of similarity. There are some places where there are some notable differences. There's, I think, a bigger focus in the PLA on the use of AI for command and control. And I think that they're right, actually. And that's one, I think there's a huge opportunity there. And that's probably a place where we need more focused attention within the U.S. military. But in general, I mean, I think you look at some of the innovations that we've seen in the Defense Department on bringing commercial tech, like Defense Innovation Unit out in Silicon Valley. They've got their own version. Right after the DoD made DIU, the PLA created their own rapid response small group in Shenzhen to bring commercial technology into the PLA. And in fact, Chinese commentators called it China's DIU. So, it's a pretty level playing field, and which frankly, is no good for us. We don't want an even competition here. So we've got to find ways to move faster.
But I mean, is there AI as effective as ours is? I mean, is there any way to, I know military technologies are usually pretty classified, and especially the Chinese are not making that available to the likes of us. But I mean, do you notice any difference in the quality of the technology?
At the very cutting edge of the most advanced AI systems like ChatGPT or its successor GPT-4, Chinese labs are behind, but they're not that far behind. They're maybe 18 months behind the cutting edge, right? But here's the reality is DoD's 5 years behind the cutting edge. So that gap doesn't really matter that much between us and China, right? So sure, the top US labs like OpenAI or Google Research, they're a little bit ahead of their Chinese counterparts, but nobody in the DoD is using GPT-4 and spinning that in for military applications. They're just trying to do basic things like image recognition, using machine learning systems to identify images. That's very widely available. I mean, we actually see Ukrainian civilian drone operators using that technology in Ukraine.
That's it.
Now right. Yeah. So it's online for anyone to download. So I think that, it's going to be really more about who can find the best ways of using AI and then getting through some of these cultural barriers to adoption and adopting it. And that's where, honestly, DoD has had a lot of problems. We've had a lot of struggles here. If you look at just something like the Jedi cloud computing effort, that ran into this huge buzzsaw of lawsuits and protests from companies who didn't win this contract, $10 billion cloud computing contract. It's a lot of money on the table. And, DoD got mired in this whole raft of lawsuits and protests and, investigations, all of which were at the end of the day dismissed. But DoD eventually cried uncle, canceled the contract, and now put out a multi-vendor solution so that multiple companies can get a piece of the pie. And that's a good example where our system is what's slowing us down. That's killing us.
In China, the CCP has integrated completely into their private industry, if you could even call it that. So that those barriers don't really even exist. I mean, they're artificial, even if they look so on paper, right?
Yeah, they have procurement problems, particularly in the PLA. I mean, they move slowly too. They've got these big state-owned enterprises, but you're not going to get the kind of political pushback that you might get here in the U.S. That's obviously a big difference. When we saw, for example,
sue the Chinese government and take the party to court. Yeah,
right. I mean, first of all, there's no independent judiciary to do that in. And if you stick your head up and complain and protest, you find yourself in jail. And the CCP in particular in recent years has really been cracking down hard on their tech sector, reeling in a lot of these kind of tech moguls like Jack Ma that used to be kind of independent power bases. They've been cracking down on that for mostly reasons of internal control and solidifying their control over the private sector.
So what else came out of your book as far as like your research, things that were surprising to you, things that you learned about where, the future of war is going in regards to AI?
Well, one of the things that was most interesting to me was the opportunity for AI systems to do things not just better than humans in warfare, but differently. And so I talked about the Alpha dogfight example where it had this different tactic. But this comes up time and again when you look at AI performance in different games. Chess, Go, poker, computer games like Dota 2 and StarCraft, where it's not just that the AI systems are better, they actually operate differently. And there's commonalities across how they do it differently, which I think was fascinating because these are very, very different games. And in some cases, different kinds of AI models actually under the hood. So some of them are things that you would expect, like better speed and precision that AI systems have compared to people. It also included the ability of better situational awareness. So in, like, for example, these computer games like StarCraft and Dota 2, there's a lot happening. And the AI systems get access to the same amount of information as people do, but they can process more information more effectively. And we also see this in chess and Go, where the agents are able to play more effectively, like across the whole board. They just basically can like sort of look holistically better than humans can. In some settings, they can do better long-term planning than humans, not in all games, but in some of them like chess, where they'll make moves early on that were like, even grandmasters not totally sure why it's doing that. And then down the road, you could see, like how it really set itself up for advantage. We've also seen different kinds of risk-taking by AI systems, which is a lot of potential in warfare. So in poker, the AI systems can change their betting strategies bigger and faster and like sort of with more variance than human players can, even the best human poker players, because, human poker players are still like sort of mired by human psychology. So, you put like a lot of money in the pot, even the most cold-blooded player, like their heart rate's going to go up. They're going to respond to that. AI doesn't care. It's just calculating probabilities. And so we can see in a number of settings like that risk-taking has advantages. In some of the games like StarCraft and Dota 2, they're just more aggressive. And so they keep the pressure on human players in ways that humans can't. There's like lulls, there's like lulls in the little sort of combat action in these things, and the human players have to shift their attention somewhere else. The AI system doesn't have these problems. So you can imagine for combat that having huge implications where, for people, there's lulls in the action, right? People need to rest. They need to refit. AI doesn't need any of that. And that's like a potentially wholly different dynamic for the psychology of war.
Yeah, that's pretty frightening to consider. Since we kind of talked about the fighter pilot aspect of it a lot, but I'd like to kind of probe the wire a little bit more here as far as like ground troops, like infantry. How do you see AI changing the battlefield for, the guys on the ground? You talked a little bit about the medevac portion of it, but there, Microsoft is developing this sort of VR or mixed reality visor, having some problems with it. But I mean, like any of these technologies, I have to figure they'll work them out eventually. How do you see this playing out for those guys?
So I think the biggest change that we're likely to see in infantry combat in the next, decade or so, or decade or two, is the proliferation of smaller precision guided weapons down to the infantry level. So things like, guided, laser guided sniper bullets, certainly like drones, things like, small kamikaze weapons like the Switchblade, for example, where in the 20th century, precision guided weapons completely transformed air and maritime warfare. And we saw, for example, the shift, from battleships, pulling alongside each other and slugging it out to now, missiles, and totally changing the dynamic of surface warfare, for example, or aerial combat. Now moving to really like beyond visual range combat, predominantly in the aerial domain. But precision guided weapons haven't really yet proliferated down to the infantry yet, just because they're expensive. You've got to pack a lot of guidance into ammunition. That is changing. And I think that's going to be a big game changer because one of the effects that it does is it can take away cover for the infantry. Mm-hmm. So, ground combat today is not, well, first of all, we see playing in Ukraine, a very old school war. I mean, it looks a lot like World War I in a lot of respects. But even like modern infantry combat, it's not changed that much in the last, say, 70 years. Like you could take a World War II soldier and you could give them a short class on the optics of their weapon and night vision. And then you could, stick them in a stack of an infantry squad and they could keep up. They could follow along. It hasn't changed that dramatically. And I think these technologies are going to start to change that. Drones is a component of this, largely because the persistence of drones then takes away sort of the ability to hide, right? And so the combination of drones taking away your ability to hide, providing sort of this persistent threat in the air, with precision-guided munitions taking away cover and the ability to use things like a switchblade or like an XM25 to go beyond cover and then to strike someone is, I think, going to over time really radically transform ground warfare in ways that nobody's ready for, because it's going to make the environment for the infantry a lot more transparent and a lot more lethal. And that's a very different world to be in.
And a lot faster, I'd imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you've got to think about, much more cohesively about things like deception and concealment and decoys as ways to operate in this much more transparent and lethal environment.
You think that's going to, when we talk about like speeding up the rate, do you think that wars are going to be fought over a much more limited period of time? Like you hear like the Chinese military planning, what's the term they use? Like resource intensive, short duration conflict, or is that sort of a pipe dream too? Like you said, you watch what happens in Ukraine and it's like, World War I trench fighting.
Yeah. I think that would be a bold claim to make, particularly now that we're watching this war in Ukraine drag on, right? And there's certainly no end in sight. And even though it's settled into this, really bloody stalemate, you could see that neither side is interested in giving up anytime soon. And, I'll put my cards on the table and say, I thought this thing would be over long ago. Like I thought the Russians were going to win and take Kiev in 30 days. So got that wrong. I think that there's this tendency in the U.S. defense community to envision these like very short, sharp wars, because that's the kind of wars that we like, right?
Right. That's a clear, definitive end. Yeah,
like we want to refight Desert Storm again and again and again, and yet we've seen a lot of wars that are not like that. Afghanistan, 20 years, right? And so I think that there's no reason to think, and I think Ukraine should really caution us against this idea that a major power war would be short and sharp. That part matters too. And, if you look at something like a Taiwan conflict, like, yes, you have to sink a lot of amphibious ships coming across the Taiwan Strait in the first 72 hours. And that's really key. And if you do enough of that, if you sink enough ships early on, then the invasion fails because they're not able to get across. And if you don't, and they're able to establish a lodgment and get enough people on the ground, then it's a much longer, bloodier fight. But even if you sort of do all the right things, the war could still drag on for months or years. Once you sort of like open up Pandora's box, it's, the war can take a life of its own. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind. So I think there's a risk that AI accelerates the tempo of conflict as we see AI accelerating targeting cycles and we see more of the, at the sort of tactical and operational level, things become automated. But that doesn't mean necessarily that the war itself is over quickly. It may drag on.
So the other thing, that I'd like to touch upon is, maybe a little bit of like AI skepticism here. These technologies, especially as Americans, I think we have this view that like there's a technological solution for everything.
Yeah.
A lot of the ways we talk about the technologies that often sounds like some corporation's pitch deck. This is the technology that's going to change everything. And I don't mean to be dismissive about AI. I think that, it is an important technology that's going to change the way we live our lives. But is there room for skepticism? Is there a reason to be skeptical of this technology? Is it right now people are getting to play with some of these technologies, in the civilian sector? But is it going to hit a a certain, not a let's just say a speed bump. Like it's gonna hit, sort of come to a conclusion, and it's going to require another generational leap of the technology to bring it to some of the things that we're imagining in our mind's eye? Or is there going to be just this clean progression that kind of ramps up? I mean, do you see any limitations on this in the near future?
I think I'll give you 3 reasons to be skeptical, and I think to ask hard questions, what you're doing, right? So one is AI technology has a lot of limitations today. It's not magic. It's pretty sophisticated. It can do some valuable things, but it can be brittle. It can lead to surprising behaviors, and it can be difficult to control or to steer in the right direction. In particular, AI systems have a lot of problems with novelty, and they don't generalize well. And so they're often, if you train, for example, like a machine learning based image classifier on pictures of Russian tanks, you could train it, if you have enough pictures of Russian tanks from different angles, to pick out what a Russian tank looks like. But if you don't have any images in your data set in the wintertime with snow on the ground and snow on the tanks, it can't generalize that. Whereas a human could be like, oh yeah, it's a T-72, it's just got snow on it. The AI, it literally is incapable of doing that unless you have that in your data set. And so that's like one major limitation. The second one is everything is countermeasures. These systems have countermeasures too. They're vulnerable to all sorts of ways of hacking and spoofing and manipulating at the cognitive level of how the system thinks, and finding ways to trick it in kind of clever ways. And that's a real problem. And one of the challenges is that we don't have a good sense of how to patch those vulnerabilities in these AI systems. So it's not like a cyber vulnerability where if you can find the vulnerability in the code, then you also know how to patch it. Kind of they come together. For a lot of these AI systems, we know you could trick it in some way by sending it a manipulated image or a piece of data, but we maybe don't know how to fix that. For example, you could do things like if you can get into the data set, you can poison the data set with altered images. If it's like, say, an image classifier, that then you can later use to hide objects or to show to trick the system into believing something is something else, right? And I talk about this a little bit in the book, where I went to Johns Hopkins University to their applied physics lab, and they gave me a demonstration of some of this, where they had this really innocuous object, a sticker, and if you stand in front of this image classifier, it identifies you as a person. If you hold the sticker in front of yourself, it then, because the sticker's there and they poisoned the data set, it classifies you as, I think, a teddy bear is what they've done it, but it could be anything, right?
Right.
So you could use this to camouflage, your military systems, for example, and to hide them. So the AI doesn't even see them, which could be pretty devious.
Future shaping operations to include poisoning the enemy's data set, right?
That's right. And particularly when we see like a lot of commercial attack and a lot of commercial data being used, that could be a vector in. So those are things we've got to be conscious of. And look, at the end of the day, I think the third reason to be skeptical is humans fight wars. They fought wars in the past using spears, bows and arrows, and cannons and machine guns. In the future, they're going to fight wars using AI and robotics, but it's still humans fighting for human reasons. And we want to find ways to use these tools, but the AI is not actually going to be doing the fighting for you. Just like, the submarine or aircraft isn't actually doing the fighting. You're using it. It's a necessary tool in some of those domains in order to be combat effective, but you're still going to need the human guiding these systems.
So, Paul, tell us who is for Battlegrounds for? Sell it to us. Who should go and read this book, and why?
Yeah. If you're interested in how AI is going to change global power, if you're worried about what China is doing with AI, and you want to know what the U.S. military should be doing, then this book covers all of those bases. So the book walks through the 4 battlegrounds of competition in an age of artificial intelligence, data, computing hardware, human talent, and institutions like the ones we were talking about, Defense Innovation Unit and others, to bring in this technology and then use it effectively. And it's, certainly a moment where we could see that AI is going to bring interesting changes, but what exactly it's going to do, there's a lot of questions. And my hope is that the book helps address some of those questions.
And where can people go find it? Available wherever books are sold, I take it?
It is available anywhere books are sold, in person, online, on Amazon and Barnes & Noble and all of the other booksellers.
Any final thoughts? Anything you really want to get out there that I didn't ask about?
I think one of my most surprising takeaways was that I actually think the U.S. is in a great place in this competition to stay ahead of China. I think we have huge advantages, particularly in chips and the AI hardware that underpins these systems, and in human talent, with the U.S. being a major draw for talent from around the world. But we've got to find a way to capitalize on those advantages. So I don't think that it's sort of we're destined to see China win this competition. I take them very seriously. I think they're good, and we need to find ways to double down on our strengths. But I actually think the U.S. is in a really strong position to be the global leader in AI, to stay the global leader in AI, if we find ways to capitalize on those strengths.
Well, Paul, thank you for the work that you do and for writing this book. I'm definitely going to continue following your work. Look forward to seeing what your next project is. I mean, if you have any idea what that is and you want to drop a little hint on the audience, now's the time.
I'll give a quick hint. I have some long essay that recently came out in Foreign Policy talking about how these most capable AI models like ChatGPT and GPT-4 are going to change global power as they proliferate, and talking about how to manage their proliferation. And it's certainly a plug for where my head is and some of the work that I'm doing now at the Center for New American Security and things we're looking for going forwards.
Thanks for joining us. I hope all of you got something out of Paul and I's conversation about artificial intelligence and found it helpful. If you are interested in a deeper dive on the subject of military AI, I highly recommend Paul's books, Army of None and 4 Battlegrounds, which are both available now. I will see all of you next time. I'm Jack Murphy, and this is Military Matters.
Folks, be sure to head over to stripes.com and use promo code podcast to get 50% off your digital subscription to Stars and Stripes, the news source that has supported American service members no matter where they've been deployed to. Stars and Stripes has been there and continues to be there, so drop some characters in your address bar, stripes.com, promo code podcast, and lock yourself in for 50% off your digital subscription. This episode was brought to you by Homes for Our Troops, a nonprofit helping build and donate homes to injured post-9/11 veterans. Visit hfotusa.org for more information. Now you can hear Military Matters Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard and Sundays at noon on Wreaths Across America Radio, available on the iHeart Radio, TuneIn and Audacy apps.